Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatirons Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. This is the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast, episode number 50, the big 50. Crazy that we've made it to this point, and I mean, still got a lot to do from here, but yeah, I just, before we kind of kick into the podcast, just want to say, up the front, I mean, thanks to everybody who's found us, who's listened to us, who has reached out to thank us for the content or let us know that they like what we're doing, what we're talking about. That's just been a huge part of the motivation for us to keep this thing going, to keep finding ways to connect and keep recording these things, putting them out there is just you guys that are listening to the podcast and letting us know about, what you like about it, how much you enjoy it, that sort of thing. So you guys are the reason that we are still here doing this thing. And I don't know, who knows where we're going to go from here, but just, want to say thanks right at the beginning to everybody that's listened this whole time. And if you're a new listener, head on back. There's a lot of good stuff back there to check out. We've had a lot of good conversations on this podcast to date. And it's really kind of interesting to kind of think about where we started, just literally sitting around in the front room of the shop here and recording a conversation to the point where we've actually had all sorts of guests on and talked about all sorts of different topics and to different people and lots of really cool conversations. So makes me excited to see where we're going to be at in another 50 episodes. So maybe by then we'll actually have flying cars. I know that's been promised. So yes, who knows? So, all right. Well, so for episode 50, as it is now kind of the season is winding down. It is now about mid-October as we're recording this. The weather is starting to turn. Most of the events have been run, like most of the competition schedules have kind of run their course. So that's kind of what we want to talk about. So the dream at this point is that you're sitting on track in your last session. You're driving your car. You come off track. You just logged a really good lap time. You pull into your pit spot. You turn the car off as it's running perfectly, and you think to yourself, "Wow, that was a great season. I can't wait to do that again." And then you put it in your trailer. You go home, and then basically you just get through the holidays in the snow and the weather and wait for the next season to start, so that your perfectly running race car can be used again. Now that's the dream.
What sort of fantasy world are you living in?
Yeah, right. Trey Tyler's fantasy world.
I think this is I think this is actually one of the original inspirations for The Matrix, because if that's actually how your season has ended, then maybe you took the blue pill, and that's, I guess that's cool. If you're happy being a battery, that's fine. But for a lot of us, for many of us, the season is ending at the end. The season might have actually ended a couple events ago, because your car and your time and your budget ran out before the end of the season. And so a lot of times the end of the season is kind of a rebuilding point, where you now have to strategize, like, okay, I've now got a car that needs some serious attention. And how do I get this thing ready again to be able to catch or start running again at the beginning of next season? And that can be a tough process for sure. So that's kind of what we wanted to talk about for this episode. So I guess Scotty or DSX, we're like, as you both of you are now kind of come to the end of the season in that kind of a situation, where is your head at this point?
Well, I think for me is I have left myself with no running cars. I have an RV, and I have a Grom, and those are all the modes of transportation I have left myself with after this season. Broke everything properly.
What that sounds to me like is motivation.
Yeah. Yep.
Do they make studded snows for the Grom?
Oh, probably. I bet they do.
I bet
there's a whole ice series with those things.
There should be, if there isn't. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that is not an ideal way to head to the grocery store. That's for sure. So you've got some good motivation. How about you, Scotty? Where where are you sitting currently?
I'm currently sitting in the only car that works, which is our Pikes Peak Hill Climb car.
Yep.
My car is a paperweight. So,
well, and so for you, because you kind of hit the end of your season a little bit earlier than DSX did, but you kind of started down a path to try and make a last event or last two events, and then you kind of had a change of plan. So, I mean, that's especially if you have like a mid-season failure. I mean, that's one of the things you first have to weigh there is like, okay, well, I'm in the middle of this season or whatever point you're at, but there's events coming up. Do I get the car running as quickly as I can so I can try and make more events? But or do you take a quick path to get the car running again, or do you not take the quick path and think about, okay, ideally, what do I want to do? What do I need to do to get the car running again? That was kind of the challenge that you faced.
Yeah, I mean, if I hadn't already basically won the points for the season in my class, it would have been a little more fire in my ass to actually get the car back out there. And basically I just didn't want to cut corners. It's kind of felt like what I was getting into is that Tasso?
It can't be. It can't be. There's not enough pine cones in the world to get Tasso connected.
They're just rubbing them all together. A little static friction happening in there.
Pine cone static internet. Yep. Maybe.
Maybe.
I like this version of him better, where he's just like a little blurb, with the little white head.
It's just an icon.
And where
yeah, it looks just like him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an improvement. It's got the same amount of hair, I think.
Oh, man. Shots fired and then shots fired.
That's what happens when your Pinecone wireless isn't working as good.
I guess so.
So Scotty, your car, I mean, you're basically, rather than scramble to get it together to try and save a season, you basically looked at it like, well, I've accomplished a season. Let's try and make an even stronger appearance next year. Like, let's use the money with a little bit more money to have maybe like a better outcome, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could have I have a long block sitting here. I could have actually had it in the car for the last event of the season, and I basically just chose not to spend that money to put something in the car that I didn't want to run. I don't want to put something
100% on it.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it probably could have made it through the season. If I would have put it in, I mean, it's possible it could have made it a whole nother season, but I didn't want to risk it. I felt like starting over with a new block, with new components, starting over fresh was the better way to go, as opposed to like mystery parts and, just to make the last event. Luckily, this Pikes Peak car just kind of sits around. So I did get to kind of get to the last two local events, and I still got to drive a little bit, which was good.
And did some important shakedown for us, something that often gets put by the wayside because we're doing other things and maybe not testing and shaking down the car as much as we could or should do.
Yeah, we got the suspension set up. We figured out some cooling issues, mostly that we have to burp the coolant every single time.
Thoroughly.
Yeah. But yeah, the last event out in this actually turned out really well. I mean, we got some really good data about this car, and so I'm excited to actually get the boss man out in it. And
well, and like we talked about too, found out more details about potential issues with the new brake setup, just as far as temperatures and pads and that sort of thing, which is you got to find it out sooner or later, and better to find it out at a local track that's close to home, so that you're not paying big entry fees or anything like that to discover that you've got to don't run brake ducts or something along those lines. Something simple.
Holy
Whoa.
shit! Look, it's Tasso.
Did it?
You made it. Fantastic. Well, all right. So Tasso, we've already kicked off the episode 50 here. So the subject that we were talking about, just to bring you into the loop, if you haven't heard already, is dealing with the end of the season. Because most of the time you are not pulling your perfectly running functional race car into your trailer, into your garage to just let it sit through the winter months so you can just fire it up and get to race again. Usually, and oftentimes, you've got some projects ahead of you to just maybe get the thing running again. So how do you strategize in the off season to get done what needs to be done so you can basically hit the ground running at the beginning of the next season?
Yeah, Tasso, you pretty much had kind of the same early end to your season as I did. Broken cars and sitting out the last few events and being broke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my plan basically is just to ignore it until it's too late to fix it right.
Nice.
And then just slam it all together at the last minute.
That does remove all of the expensive options, and it just leaves you with the cheap and fast.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like all I've done since the transmission exploded is just essentially drain the water from the coolant so it doesn't freeze.
Yeah.
And that's it. So I've done some research. I've started the conversation for what it's going to take to get it going. So I play aloof, or apathetic about it, but I'm starting to do some budgeting and some, how do I prevent this from happening in the future and kind of some of those thoughts. So I think the cause of my failure was just a factory size U-joint in the drive shaft, as opposed to uprated U-joints. And then it just beat the back of the transmission apart, because it came apart at speed, right? So that's why it caused transmission case failure. So
yeah. So if people haven't seen your Instagram post or whatnot of it, the tail section of your STI transmission is basically split right down the middle where there should not be a split.
No, yeah, this gear is on the outside now. It's got open bath lubrication and all sorts of fun stuff like that. So, there's a lot of expensive gear oil hanging out on dirt road in Canyon City right now. But yeah, so I've started talking to Zach, ZF Design, about, what he thinks it'll take to get it back together. Obviously, the transmission's still in the car, so he won't have a real good idea until he gets in there and takes a look. But, starting the process of get stronger drive shaft, essentially. It's the second drive shaft I've broken. I think the first one was just a fluke accident. This one, though, I think was just the limit of, the strength of the U-joints, right? It appears the U-joint shattered. And that was a, full power wheel spin hitting like chunky rocks kind of thing. So I think it was loading and binding, and it finally found that weak point. But, it's not, because I'm running kind of custom drive shafts anyways, it's not a big deal to go to just a bigger, stronger drive shaft while I'm doing it. So,
and this is a steel drive shaft.
Yeah. So I run a ZF Design steel one-piece drive shaft. I don't know if he sells them or not, but he does have a couple if you talk to him and you're in the market. They've been really good. They save a lot of weight. They save most of the weight of going to like a carbon drive shaft or something like that. But you save a lot of the cost, and you have a lot more of that, like for me, that, impact strength. I was worried about gravel spray and stuff for the carbon, and they're really small diameter too, right? So you got to think about
lower moment of inertia.
Shaft. Mm-hmm. Exactly. But the weight is very much closer to the center of that. Right. So, so yeah, I think his newer designs have a bigger U-joint already. Yeah, I really don't feel like working on the car right now at all, though. So I've been riding my bike and putting it off. But yeah, there's some planning and process. And I mean, it always seems like at this point you have a million years to get stuff back together.
And it always seems that way.
It always seems that way. And you're always behind the eight ball. Like, if you have a deadline, you're already too late trying to meet it. I don't care if your deadline's 2 years from now.
you're always going to find something that, you're at the last minute trying to bash to get together. So
yeah,
I had a guy in this time trials thing. He used to work on like MPL1s and all kinds of weird stuff like that. And he said that his boss would come in and just give them these unrealistic deadlines. Like, there's no way we can make that. He's like, listen, if you've got a week, it takes a week. If you've got 2 months, it'll take 2 months. That's just how race cars are. It takes however much time to put them together that you have available.
Mhm.
Well, and what I was going to say though, sometimes, especially if you've had some point of frustration at the end of your season, like a catastrophic failure, sometimes like the best thing you can do, at least for that first week or two, is kind of like what you said, Tasso. Park the car in the garage.
Mhm.
Don't even think about it. Just kind of like clear your head about it so that you can come at it with a good plan and some energy, versus like try and take the frustration and work in more frustration and just bang your head against a race car until it runs again, because that can be a tough road to go.
Well,
and it gives an opportunity. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, regardless of how long you have, there's still the money aspect of the whole thing. Like, you have to have it back together in 4 months, but you're saving money for 3 months out of that time just to buy the parts to put it back together. So, I mean, regardless of what your deadline is, the bank account really is the dictating factor of rebuilding in the off season.
Yep. So I was going to say too, it gives you a chance to not only create that budget and that plan, but then also make that budget actionable, right? Make it possible. Yep. So
I think that like this is one of the biggest differences in going to an event and running a season, running a series of events, is when you are, I think, like let's use rally as an example. When people are like, hey, you know what, I really want, my dream is to run a season of rally. I'm going to do it. I'm going to build the car, and I'm going to just go out there and I'm going to run 5 events or 6 events or something like that in a season. And it's like this, there could be this blind spot of like, man, you have to plan that you're going to have to rebuild your car 3 times for that 6 events. Now, hopefully it doesn't happen. Maybe it's only 2 times, but like you go out there and you're using this car hard multiple times in a season or in a year, and you're going to, something's going to give, something's got to break. And, a lot of us, grassroots guys, like that's either something that you don't think about or something that just like, man, the planning and budgeting for what might happen, like that's just not possible. Usually the budget is, okay, if nothing breaks and I can use 1 set of tires, I can make all of the events. Then something does break or whatever, then all of a sudden you're kind of sent into scramble.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then the worst case is when something like that happens halfway through, because they're like, hey, it went really well for the first 4 events. There's 4 events left or 2 events left, but what do? Do I try and salvage the season, or do I try and cobble the car together to try and make the rest of the season or the last couple of events just to try and get through the whole thing? That is a difficult challenge.
Usually a big failure like I had is just a season ender for me. So I have to not think about that possibility while I'm racing. I have to go to a weekend, acknowledging the realistic aspect is, if I blow a motor up, if I take a transmission apart, unless it's a couple very specific things, it's the end of the season for me. But it doesn't mean I check up too in the meantime, because that's not fun. So
and not all of us can afford to have full spares of everything that we need. I mean, the $5,000-$6,000 spare transmission, that's tough. A full long block that you can just take out and drop a new one in so you can get back out there. I mean, all these things, it costs so much money to actually run a full season that the idea of having spare anything is next to impossible for most of us. So
I only have about 8 hours of work to fix the car, but I have to work for a couple months to create that
right.
possibility. So.
Well,
I think the more you do it, the longer you stay in it and the longer you do it, the more spares you end up with. Because I was kind of in a similar situation. And I mean, not that the yellow car should be a parts car, but the blue car was kind of a parts car for the yellow car. So is the yellow car going to be kind of a parts car if I need it for the blue car? I mean, like it's even still, you start to collect some of these things. Or if you do have a good year, if anybody out there like, man, I had a perfect year, I'm Trey Tyler, and I'm hanging my car up, and I'm going to pull it right out and start all over again. Maybe instead of hitting the cruise control or hitting the cruise button thinking I got this, maybe like, all right, cool. Well, I didn't have to do anything right now, but maybe I should go ahead and get that long block build going or get that next thing going so I can have that next season. Because I can't even imagine like to be in your position, Tasso, where you had such a banger season, and if you were one event down, to finish that season like on top versus not finish the season at all, it would be a real struggle because it's going to cost you the same amount to do one event as it would to do a whole other season again. It's just if that money's available,
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's sort of the only not first place that we got, whether it was qualifying or racing, was when we broke the transmission. We ended up second. But because we missed a race at the beginning of the year, because of not even race-related breakdowns, but other breakdowns, and then the last race, we ended up third overall, even with our almost perfect record while the car was working. But it is what it is. That's okay. It's all. I mean, you can't sit there and dwell on a breakage and downtime and stuff like that, because you end up just getting eaten up by the negativity of, oh, the shit's always broken, and stuff like that. So
well, and it's a really healthy thing to focus on the positives that you did have. I think it's so easy to get pulled in the direction of like, I have to go and do this last race of the season so that I can really put the season together, and then it's very easy to overstress yourself and your budget to make this one more event, and then like who knows what happens? Maybe it all goes to plan, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's a tough call, and that's one of those things. Like as you run more seasons, more events, you just kind of realize, well, is this worth stressing out over, or do we have enough positives that we can just focus on the positives for the season, and then just really take our time and rebuild for next season? And I mean, obviously you have a failure, and like you've already talked through, you've kind of tried to pinpoint as best you can what the cause of the failure is. So when you put the car back together, the plan is to prevent that failure from happening again. But like in Scotty's situation, he had a short-term plan, but that short-term plan meant using a used long block or used components that in theory were running and were in good condition, but there were unknowns thrown in there. And if you over prioritize running another event or trying to finish out the season and cut corners, a lot of times that can cost you more money in the long run, because like just making sacrifices, cutting corners, a lot of times that comes back to bite you.
Yeah, it's easy to spend as much as it would take to fix it the right way, just in fixing it the wrong way a couple times, trying to smash to get back to an event, right? Like you put $100 motors in, and then you're into $1,000 motor kind of thing, or knock the whole thing up by a power of 10 or something like that to make it make more sense. What I'm trying to say here,
right?
But
put in $1,000 used long block and have a catastrophic failure and take out everything.
Right.
Now you're not just down an engine, but you're also down an engine and turbo.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows?
Heads. Cams.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things, like a lot of times you have to just kind of get into that situation and work through the situation to really be able to fully appreciate the weight of some of those decisions that you're making in that moment.
Yeah.
Well,
and when it all goes pear-shaped, you could just sit around, drink a bunch of beer, and dwell on the fact that it all went pear-shaped.
Yep, there you go.
Then drink more beer, trying to figure out the plan to how to fix it.
Well, and back to what you were saying earlier, Ryan, about like what can you do if you don't have any failures? Like the simplest thing is just keep socking away whatever your event budget is. so that you actually have some budget in reserve.
Yeah.
So that when something like this comes up, you've got maybe a financial ability to fix things the right way, or the way that you would want them to, versus have to really like try and find a solution for a minimum budget that you can afford to get the car running again.
Yeah. I mean, it costs money too. And that's kind of what I was trying to say before. It costs money to get to events. And, for the time and all that other stuff, where Scotty's like, oh, I've sealed, I've got TT3, I've completed the minimum number of events, and I've won enough of those events to seal the season. It's almost like, you could almost even look at it as like, it's almost like financially more responsible not to go to that event unless you have other empirical gains like social media gains or whatever it is.
Yep.
But I mean, it sucks to be like one event down, and then you have 3 events that you could still make, but you just need one of them, whereas you're talking about starting all over again. So all the fuel and transportation costs, all the time off work to get to it again, and all those other things. And you could still have a failure. And now you've got 2 seasons with no wins versus 1 season with a podium finish, at least a 3rd or 1st.
Yeah.
And I think people, I know for me, which is kind of silly because I've never actually really won a whole competition series because I run so many damn competition series. But I think for me, I mean, that has definitely been a thought process. Like at SCCA Time Trials Nationals, it was, okay, is there a transmission anywhere close in the state of Kentucky? Because to get back here again next year, could cost me way more than this transmission is going to cost me now. And will I be enough for me to podium or get first or get second? And will I be happy with that result? And so that's what we did. Like we went and bought a transmission and for sales drove 4 hours round trip and then spent 3 hours installing it. Yeah. And it was because, that was better than taking what ended up being a 2nd place win for that event was better than nothing. And trying to come back next year, not knowing whether or not you could.
Yeah. It is a difficult situation to be in, but like I really think it's one of those things where, like, having been through it once, you're going to be better positioned to do it again, or hopefully maybe we can shed some light to give you a better plan of attack to decide, like, should I try and get the car running as quickly as I can, or do it the right way. And I mean, the other thing I would say to that end is always look for the cause of the failure, kind of like what Tasso has said, but it's just like, it's not enough to just get the car back together again. If you know you had a failure, you've got to try and find what caused the failure and prevent it for the next time, because ultimately you want to fix those weak links, because you want to make it so that, okay, well, even if you have to wait till the next season, once you get rolling in that next season, you want to reduce the chances of having a similar failure like that as much as possible.
So how do we keep rocks off of racetracks?
You put a mesh in front of the radiator.
Yeah,
I mean, that helps. Yeah, or just only drive in marsh climates. Just drive like in Louisiana where there are no rocks.
Sure.
There you go.
You probably get flood damage, but
well, hey, water's not going to break a radiator.
And I hit a lot of rocks, and so far, a rock hasn't broken anything other than a tire for me. So maybe it's just driver error.
I think boulders are different than rocks.
Or just dumb luck, just straight up dumb luck. I mean, that is unfortunately a part of racing.
Yeah, it is.
Trying to get Scotty all fired up.
It's just so ridiculous that, like, find the cause of failure. Somebody threw a rock into my radiator on track. It's just shit. There was nothing wrong with that car at all. It's a pretty much a brand new build that had 5 or 6 events on it, and I got taken out by a rock.
Some days just aren't your day.
Evidently.
I think another thing, not to get everybody out to your tuning store and buying the equivocal bread, but I think that next year, we're going to be having an even tougher year with distribution, or at least as tough as it is. We went to go buy tires we had to buy 28 tires for the Solstices, which is awesome, at PPIR. And when you go down and start looking at the tires that are available, I mean, a lot of these tires aren't going to be available like that are common sports car tires for what we do until December or January. And that's projected as of right now. Like if you wait till January to buy them, what's that going to look like? You know, is that going to be February? Are you going to be able to make your event because you don't have tires? You know, and maybe somewhat in the off-season prep, say you got something on your car that's really exotic, like, I don't know, a hand-built intercooler from Australia. And you decide, all right, I'm only going to have one of these hand-built intercoolers from Australia with me at all times. And then you go out somewhere and you break an intercooler. Well, even if it's about trying to make the next event and it takes you 2-3 months to get an intercooler, is that a good thing to only have one of? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think that's part of the upside of running OEM parts, like OEM control arms and OEM hubs and things like that. But sometimes you got to look at some of these lead times. If you're sitting at home like, well, I mean, I've had a great season, I don't know what else I need to have, kind of waiting around, thinking about those things that took you a while to get. Like it took me 6 weeks to get brake pads because I didn't get them from Danny at G-Lock. But, you know, I mean, just whatever. You know, those high-end or those goofy parts, like maybe a custom-built drive shaft from ZF Design or whatever the case is, maybe you should think about that too. Like, do I need to make sure I have all the weird, hard-to-get parts for my car so that I don't miss half a season waiting on a stupid turbo?
Talking about what you can do if you don't have a failure to build from in the off-season is like trying to plan out, okay, well, what are my vulnerabilities in terms of parts? Like what is custom enough? Like you'd think like a custom built X, Y, or Z would be the best. Maybe it's the best, but if it is, and that's what you have to use, then all of a sudden it's like, well, okay, now what happens if something goes haywire with that?
Yeah, totally.
Well, and that's the same point in time. It's not like you can afford 2 custom built intercoolers from Australia. Like,
no, it's true.
At once, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, I have one, but maybe in the off season I should buy another one. But now I have to buy all this other stuff. You know, it's just
it compounds too, because it's not just the cost of the spare parts, but there's a point where like I can't really carry more spare parts to a race without upgrading either a trailer or a truck or something like that, right? So it's not just, you know, $4,000 to have a spare transmission to bring with me to races or something like that. It's now also, okay, well, you know, $8,000 for a nice enclosed trailer with room for that as well.
Yeah.
And then, well, I got all this room. I might as well bring a spare long block too. And then like, well, shit, if I'm going to bring the long block, I got to bring a cherry picker and maybe an engine stand to get it all dressed out. And then suddenly, oh, maybe I need a $12,000 enclosed trailer. And now we're getting beyond the capability of the truck. And the next thing you know, you got a semi-truck, 2 semi-trucks coming with you, and you're a NASCAR team. Yeah. So,
and I think to a certain extent, it's like you've got to decide like event per season. So it's like, well, you know, like we've talked about, like if we do actually build a race engine for the Pikes Peak car, when that happens, like if it's all going to be custom, and we've seen like we had basically a hose fail that dumped all the coolant out and completely nuked the entire engine. It was gone. And in Pikes Peak, it's such a short window of time. It's like, well, if you have something like that totally random event happen that takes out the entire engine, so it's not usable. If you want to continue, if you don't want to just be able to like throw your hands up and say, all right, we'll just come back next year, you've got to have that spare thing available. I remember talking to Victor Coons, who's raced his GC up Pikes Peak. There's one point where the 1 year that he didn't finish is because he didn't have his daily driver GC with him, because he considers that daily driver GC basically a parts car for the race car. It's like if everything went completely pear-shaped, he could move the entire engine and drivetrain from the daily driver car into the Pikes Peak or into his Pikes Peak car, if he absolutely had to, just to try and make the event.
Yeah,
which is a bit extreme, but it's like you kind of see the rationale of that. But then to your point, Tasso, though, like if you can't carry the spares with you, then you have your kind of no-go point for the event. Okay, well, if the engine fails, right, so the event is off, but if you've still got the engine in your garage, you can bring the car back and get it running again quickly. then the season can still be on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I set a really low go no go for my events too, because at the end of the day, I'm racing because it's fun.
Right. Right.
And so I don't think it's fun. I know some people are all about it, and it's whatever the spirit of rally or press on regardless and stuff like that. But I don't think it's fun to be up all night switching a motor just to try and get 2 competition runs on Sunday kind of thing. So,
right.
And if I significantly bend a piece of the car or break a mechanical thing, I'll hang out and watch a little bit and then go home. And then, I'll work on stuff at home, where I have the time and the tools and a garage and
better facility,
not doing the middle of the night kind of thing. So I do set a pretty low go no go, which is why I don't carry many spares, which is why I can get away with, a small truck and a small trailer. And, they're like tires. I bring like 12 tires, including the ones on the car, to every event with me, because those are a quick thing to fix and I go through them,
Yep.
But beyond that, I used to bring like a rear diff and a drive shaft and lateral links and, trailing arms and, all sorts of stuff. And I was prepared to rewire the car if I had to and all this kind of stuff. Not anymore. No.
Yeah.
Dang, you're losing your fight, dude.
Yeah,
there's that difference between the local events, where it's like, 1-3 hours to get to, where it's like, it broke, wrap it up and go home, as opposed to like a destination event. You drive all the way out to Road America, and like if you would have had a spare motor Sunday morning, it's possible you could have replaced it and made the last session.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was, and it's, you never know what conditions are going to be even too. And man, it was just beautiful conditions the whole day. So you could have put down a flyer at the end of the day or achieved your goals at the end of the day. You know, I mean,
it's a good point.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's like we're talking about wanting to go and run at Circuit of the Americas. And that's probably a 1-day haul from here, day and a half, but at the same time, like that's a pretty big event, and that's one of those things like, when we were running the rally car and we were running national events, like all across the nation, it was one of those, like your spares bid just starts to grow, because it's like, well, if you're going to have to like pay the diesel to get out to the event and back, pay the hotels to get there or to stay there, pay the entry fees, like the last thing that you want is to have a failure before the race starts, or a failure in like the first couple of stages, because then that's a lot of effort and funds spent to get there where you don't really get to participate. And so it's like, that's where all of a sudden, like you bring as much as you possibly can so that you can keep the car running, so you can at least run that event, barring some kind of catastrophic failure.
Yeah. Ryan, when you went to COTA the first time, we had a spare transmission in there. I forget, did you have a spare block?
I brought my 205 with me, didn't I?
I think so. Okay.
Yeah.
So a spare transmission, a spare block. I mean,
and
that's
spare diff
and a spare diff.
Yeah.
And axles. And we used the diff and the axles, on our, and we did, and you guys, I should say, I didn't do shit. I looked handsome. You guys swapped that diff out and the axles out like on the lunch break. Just pretty awesome.
On Saturday.
Yeah.
You got to finish Saturday and run Sunday.
And all day Sunday. Yeah.
Well, then, wasn't there a power steering pump or an alternator in there?
Oh yeah,
power steering pump.
Power steering.
At the end of the day, yeah.
Which we didn't have a spare of. We had to drive out to Rally
Ready. Yep.
Yeah.
And go pick that up. Thanks again, Dave.
Yeah. Man, it's once you travel, once you make some distance, or you're running a big event, like that's where there can be some pressure to keep the car going.
Yeah.
It's harder to just kind of go, no, I'm going to hang it up for this weekend.
But that's another thing too, where it's almost as important to have that network, like those contacts, right? Like I would almost rather bring along a group of really well-connected friends than a group of really expensive spare parts kind of thing, because you can always, you never bring the spare part for the thing that breaks for the most part, right? And it's the old adage in racing is if you bring a spare, that part's good for the weekend kind of thing.
Yeah. That's Murphy's Law of racing. Whatever you have with you, you will not break.
But having a resource like Rally Ready, around the corner, Ryan, you do all sorts of traveling around the Midwest and the South and the Appalachians and stuff like that, right? Like, or even now, like what Facebook has done with like the numerous like competition Facebook groups, right? Whether it's the rally stuff or the time attack or track subies and stuff like that, right? Like those, bring along digitally, as opposed to the old fashioned having a network face to face. I mean, now you have that network available, and at least on the rally side, especially every rally weekend, I see posts like, hey, who has, a spare block for a, 2000 whatever Civic in the northern, in the UP or something like that in Michigan, right? And somebody comes up, and so it's like the networking is like, I don't know, it's a cool thing, and it's a cool development for like the making those long drives to races like a little bit less of like spare parts, burden.
Yeah, I mean, and you got race teams bringing out big trailers too, and I'm still like a small trailer, but I had 3 or 4 people use my welder at the weekend of Road America. And I was just, I don't know, like for me, and I'm sure like JJ and those guys kind of feel the same way. Even if you don't know somebody or whatever, sometimes it's kind of cool to be part of the solution instead of being part of the burden, Tasso. But I mean, ultimately, that is kind of the thing. And what I think it gives you, one, you got guys, if you are the dude who brings like common spares with you, the guys that come with you and crew for you are more confident that they're going to have more success. Because I would imagine from a crewing perspective, if you go out there to crew for a guy and his car blows up and he doesn't have the parts and doesn't have the drive to find them, I mean, that probably is a bummer, but so you get, I think better crew expectation and engagement. And you also can be the guy who's building up like that equity, that spare part karma, that spare parts equity. And sometimes you need that, I mean, like, hey, JJ, do you have a guy who can TIG weld this aluminum fitting because we broke it? Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. There you go. We got it. And and
it's because all it takes is being that guy one time where you break something and you can't fix it. Like worst case, like in testing before the weekend even starts, like a press stage or something like that. We're like, hey, let's take some people out just for a fun 2-mile jaunt on this road before the whole rally starts, and you have a catastrophic failure there, so now you're DNF for the whole race. Just takes that once to really realize, okay, well, it's worth it, like for the parts karma or whatever, to whoever your fellow competitor is that has an issue, if you can do something to help out.
Yeah, I mean, if you're always the guy who's leaning on the community and leaning on people to help keep your car running because you don't have spares or because your car's a piece of shit or whatever the case may be, I mean, you do wear those relationships then too. But sometimes you just forget, sometimes you forget to, pay it forward or pay it back to that guy who helped you out because everything's just so fucking chaotic. But if you're also the dude who's being seen on helping and stuff, I don't know. I think it must work out. I think
it seems to. It really seems to, by and large.
And my point wasn't so much to be the freeloader, so much as how much that networking like multiplies the power of everyone's spare parts thing. Like, and it's even, it's like one of the great things about like Subaru in the gravel world, right? Like, the number of GD or spare parts crossovers to the GD chassis in the, whether it's the rally or gravel hill climb side of things. Even just little things, like I've had to borrow like the wastegate circlip that holds the actuator onto the wasteplate, right? I've had to, like, right now, my the clutch fork spring, like between the clutch fork and the bell housing, right now that's loaned out to another guy. And it's just like that continual rotation of all these weird little parts. Like, I would never think that the circlip's gonna fall off the wastegate, right? Like, that's a ridiculous thing. But
it's amazing how many ridiculous things can happen on a race weekend.
Oh yeah. Yep, for sure.
But it's that's one of the cool things about racing, and that's when you get into a good series or with a good group of people, it's that community, and that's I mean, we talked about it. I remember talking to Dave and Bucky about Mike. Just like the rally community. just how cool it is to be with people where, like, if you need something, you can ask anybody. They will at least give you I don't have it, but maybe talk to this guy or give these guys a call or something like that. It's like to know that the community's got your back. I mean, that can be really, really cool and I think that's a big pull. Like, once people get involved in racing and see, that is out there, that you're part of this community. I mean, that's part of the pull to continue to participate and to be involved with it.
Loaned out at one Rally Colorado. I loaned out a whole rear subframe with lateral links to another guy, and then another guy was going to loan me his spare ECU, and so it was like just this. We're together. We're one functioning rally team.
Yeah.
Just, like,
yep. Yeah, it rally just based on the nature, attrition nature of that sport. Like, that's all kinds of crazy stuff like that can happen.
It'd definitely be hard to loan out an engine. I will say that.
Sure.
But, you just never know what other stuff you might have. I mean, just hardware alone. My poor little duckling at Road America had the freaking brake caliper bolt come out that holds this caliper, not the brake caliper onto the bracket, but the bracket to the hub. And it was this weird Mustang bolt. And the closest we got to it was the guys at Mechanical Advantage had like a super long Allen bolt that was the right thread pitch. And we stacked the shit ton of washers so that he can continue Joy's weekend. But it was awesome. Like, for him, he said, hey, man, I need this. And he doesn't know anybody. And for me, I know at least somebody in one of these camps. So I could drive up and say, like, hey, Joel, who can I ask around here for this bolt? Or, hey, Chris, who can I ask for, this bolt? And every person was like, oh, yeah, hey, Monica, or hey, such and such. And they all legitimately went through and looked for hardware for that guy.
Yep.
And it was so cool. So, I mean, and I think that comes with doing more events too, like I was saying before, where you do get more comfortable, or people do start to recognize you. Or we've said it in the past, make friends with those dudes who are on your open lapping day, because they're going to be racing with you sometime too. You never, and don't be afraid to help somebody else out if you can. For sure.
You got to give to the community. The more you build the community, the more the community gives back to you.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's being part of that community sometimes is as much fun as the actual racing, really.
Yeah, not really, but
it is for me. I mean, I love it. I love the social engagement. I like, I mean, I always tell people, I joke that I'm like a big time narcissist, and I think Jeanette Negri probably agree, because I think she may have said that 10 or more times. And but I sometimes, this is kind of shitty, I will help people sometimes to make myself feel good. And hell, if that's your motivator to stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning doing an alternator, then that's the motivator, and anytime somebody gives me all pat on the back, like, dude, thanks, that helped, or like that shit, just, I think for me, I really, really love that. And that's not the same for everybody. Some people are like, I'm going to give you this part, I don't ever want to see your face again. Like, I don't want to be around people. I think that's more like Scotty's approach.
Like, well, that's just every day. That's just every day for Scotty.
Yeah. But I mean, so, people have their different motivators and stuff, but, even if it's not so altruistic and you just want to be the coolest dude in the paddock because you have a welder, I mean, at least there's a welder in the paddock.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like,
it feels good to help people. That's not
think
weird.
It does. Yes.
Oh, I'm going to have to tell Jeanette that. See, I'm not narcissistic.
Oh, man.
Yes, it feels good to give back to the community, even if that community is just building and running race cars.
For sure.
Yeah. Yes. Well, let's see. So Tasso, I guess as we're kind of winding down here, and you kind of joined us a little bit late. So I mean, I think we talked a little bit about DSX and Scotty's into their season. I guess anything else you want to talk about that happened before you blew up your transmission? I can't even remember the last time we had you on.
I know, it's been a long time. I've been busy. Like I was saying, I've been racing bikes. But what's been going on with my season? Nothing. I was doing well until I didn't. And that about sums that up.
that is not an uncommon path for a season.
Yeah. It is what it is. Overall, I would call it a success of a season. Like, I don't know if I've done like a season wrap up or anything or yet on the podcast, but I call it a success of a season, right? We were able to not only mechanically, but also kind of with racecraft, kind of deliver when we had to. And that was it's always been one of the goals, is to kind of, I don't know, not professionalism is not the right word, but like that, that professional ability to deliver when it's time to deliver and to put down times. And so there were a handful of races where it was on us to, be clean, or where we weren't clean and we had to clean it up in order to put down a good time. And so just between Abby and I having the conversation and refocusing and getting the routine down. So I feel good about like our ability to show up, go through our routine and deliver what we can deliver. And so that's a good feeling to be at that point where it's mechanical stuff happens and we'll fix that and we'll come back. And I feel confident though in our ability to come back and plug back into our routine and keep delivering. So, so I call that a success of the season, because that's, we had some kind of pressure filled races, with names like Reese Millen and Bucky Lassick and Dave Carapetta, whatever, and stuff like that.
Texas Dave.
So Texas Dave Carapetian. So, trying to kind of bat above our slug above our weight or something like that, and other detail, right? I don't want to, undersell any of these guys, right? They individually, each of these, victories kind of had an element of chance to them as well. But the chance fell, we did our part so that when chance fell into our lap, we were ready to take advantage of it. So,
and that's kind of, the underlying theme of a lot of this conversation really is to like go out and compete in enough events, compete in a season or two to get to the point where you have a rhythm that you can get into. You have an approach that you now are comfortable with and that works as far as getting to the event, prepping the car for the event, running the event, dealing with whatever you might come in contact with in the event, and then hopefully getting a result at the end of it.
And I think it's a really important like mental aspect to this whole thing. Because you take, even the most recent bike race I did, it had been 11 years since the last time I raced a mountain bike. And it's similar to kind of hill climbing where you have some practice, and a race day run kind of thing. And like some of my first practice runs, I was just junk, right? And there are nerves and this and that and whatever. And I kind of just stopped and said to myself, like, dude, you know what you're doing. Just stop.
Just do it.
Stop overdoing it. You know what you're doing. Just do it, right? Go back to, it's a thing. I had bad racecraft when I used to race mountain bikes. I worked on that a lot with the racing cars thing. And now it's giving me something where I can go back to racing bikes and be like, dude, racecraft now. You still have some basic skill on the bike. There are some other limitations, but this part you can control. This part's up to you to mentally get that sorted out. And so able to kind of hit that, like, just like slap yourself in the face and try it again kind of thing. Like,
well, you have to remind yourself to keep having fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When those nerves set in, when the stress sets in, I drove all this way, I spent all this money to do this. And it's like you start taking things a little too serious and you forget the fact that we all do this shit because it's fun. And once you have to remind yourself of that. Like I'm completely broke. I'm stressed. All this,
right? Because
I do think it's fun, and I'll continue to do it. Once it actually stops being fun, though, maybe it's time to start riding mountain bikes or something.
There you go.
But yeah, you just have.
Wait a minute.
You just have to remind yourself of that, like regardless of what you're doing. I'm sure those first couple practice runs, like you said, the nerves were setting in to like remind yourself, I know how to do this,
right?
Because I have fun when I do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
man. Right. There's an aspect of it's fun to do well. Like I'm not just there to exist, right? Or what? I don't show up to a car race or a bike race just to finish or just to participate, right? I want to do well. And that's not kind of realistic for the mountain biking right now, but it is for the car racing. But nonetheless, it's even that process of trying to do well is fun for me, right? So it's not just sitting in the car, turning the wheel. That's fun. Yes, that is fun. I do enjoy that. Or sitting on the, or whatever, not sitting, but, getting on the bike and doing, doing some sweet jumps and stuff, is fun.
That doesn't sound bad.
No, it's not bad at all. But even the process of racing, I think, is fun and a part of that too. So it's that recentering, that refocus, like clean your shit up, focus on fundamentals, clean braking, clean corners, apply power where it needs to be applied, check up where you need to check up, go where you need to go, and then deliver. And that's, I think, universal.
And what's so important about what you just said there is, like, that's where we all start. I mean, you're not, unless you're just happen to be like, I don't know, some amazing driver. You're not going to just show up to your first event or even your first season probably and immediately have success. You're going to be running probably at the back of the pack to stick around, to get the seat time, to get the experience, just to get to the point where you can figure out these little things that are holding you back, to get to the point where you can actually be competitive, get up to the front. You've got to find those little points of things to enjoy in being like one of the slower guys or the back of the field, and working through all of those issues. Honestly, like if you can, you're in the right place if you're racing and you have a failure early on in the weekend, and then you just help a bunch of people keep their cars running, and you look back and say to yourself, that was an awesome weekend because I did this and this and this, and it would have been great if I could have run, but I really helped a lot of people out. And so I'm going to call that a big victory. Then you are definitely in the right place.
Yeah. If you don't enjoy the process, you're never going to get the result. And whether that process is identifying your own failures, identifying your shortcomings, or helping that community grow and be stronger, like just essentially what you're saying, right? You hang out and help on the weekend, you're helping that community get stronger. And you are, not to put it, in a Ryan Dussik's conceited kind of way, or, whatever, but you're not just building karma to cash in on later, but it is a result of that too.
Well, and it just takes time. I mean, you're going to have to fight through a lot of adversity to get to the point, where you can be competitive at the front, run a full season, be able to have a failure, a big failure, and come back from it. And those are just some of the things that probably are in the cards for you, if you like motorsports and you want to participate in that way. It's finding a way to find enjoyment through all of the adversity of it, which is that is a hard thing to do, but it absolutely can be done.
Yeah. It's not just when it's going well that shows you who you are. It's when you can't put together a clean lap to save your life, or you can't figure out why the motor won't tune up correctly or something like that. That's what kind of shows you what you got. So,
well, it takes experience. You've just got to just build up that experience, drive at a bunch of tracks, work through a bunch of issues, so that then you're at an event, you're having a problem, and you're like, wait a minute, you know what? I bet you I have a slow leak in this tire because the tire pressure, like I know that the tire pressure issue can cause this kind of a handling issue. Let me rule this out, and you'll find out, oh yeah, this bead is just not sealing right, so I'm losing like 10 psi of pressure from start of the session to the end of the session. You fix it, all of a sudden the car works right. Man, I'm glad I had that experience that I can build on to solve this potentially difficult problem quickly and still have a good result. It's all of the experience in the past that will get you to the point where you have the tools in the toolbox to be successful.
Now Scott knows not to drive into rocks.
Yeah. If you see a rock on the track, don't hit it.
Don't drive into it. Don't let it drive through you.
That's right. Harder in rally, easier on most of the time on a paved track, but you never know. Yes.
You never know.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, go ahead.
I'd like to add a couple of things. I mean, for people in the off season, don't forget about your tow rigs. Don't forget about the things that you tow with. Oh, look at that. They gave me a thumbs up when I did that. Don't forget your tow rigs. Don't forget the things that your trailers and stuff. Another thing too is don't forget tires. If you're cold, they're cold. and same with your fire suppression. If they're cold, you're cold, and drain the water out of your race car before you forget about it. Because
don't forget your intercooler sprayers.
Yeah,
water.
Drain the water out of your intercooler sprayers. We lost the last ones on the Pikes Peak car. Was that last winter?
Yep.
It cracked all the piping.
Had to replace the whole thing. Yep.
Had to replace the whole thing.
And
I just remembered that on my car actually this last weekend.
I didn't even take that into consideration. I totally.
There's a bunch of people listening to this right now, assuming anyone listens, but there's a bunch of people that are like, why would you do that? It's only going to get down to 60 here this winter.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
You lucky punks.
They're probably not done with their seasons yet either.
Right.
Just continuous season.
Southern Californians and shit.
Yeah. We already had a day. I woke up the other day. They said it was 31 degrees at my house. There was already frost on the car.
Which is just in Boulder. It's not in the mountains. Like,
right.
Yeah, we've hit single digits already up here.
Wow.
Okay.
So.
And when did you drain your water?
Before that.
Let's hope. Yeah. Man, I tell you, if you have an
I do
engine
have a block heater. I have a block heater. There was one night where I was like, oh shit, I gotta go plug the car in. So I made it through one freezing night with the block heater and then drained it. So
yeah, we froze the water in the rally car once years ago in the previous rally car, and that was a nightmare. It was, man,
water
kinds
just
of stuff.
Fix one leak and then there's another leak and
yep. Well, and then in that car we couldn't even actually fix it because they welded the cage in right over the heater core, so there was no way to physically get the heater core out of the car. So then we had no heat. And then the Band-Aid fix just like kept popping leaks. There's one point where they were at an event and like Scott and the co-driver's feet were getting wet because coolant was leaking down or water was leaking down into the driver's compartment, which meant that we were also leaking coolant from the engine and having cooling issues. I mean, it was, that thing that plagued us for a couple of years until that car was no longer able to run. Not because of coolant, but But it was one of those like
self-limiting issue.
So very cool. Well, and definitely don't forget the tow rigs because as Tasso, I think you can attest to this. Typically, trucks work better with 4 wheels versus 3.
Yeah, well, it was an opportunity.
And trailer, trailers are the same way. Generally work better with 4 wheels instead of 3 wheels or whatever it might be in it. Yeah, it's they take a beating too.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
All right. Well, with that, I think.
Thanks for being patient and letting me get on. I missed you guys. Love you guys.
Yeah. It's been a while, but glad to have you back. Especially you made it back for the 50th episode, Tasso.
What is that?
About time. That's the world's smallest violin.
It's a tiny little heart. I'm just trying to angle it so it looks like a heart.
I see it right here.
Yeah, there it is. I got it.
That's really good. Oh, man, I thought you were telling me to pay up for something.
Pay up, sucker.
I think Brian spends too much time on TikTok.
Hell yeah.
Oh. Could be some truth to that. Yes.
Well, he's an influencer, so that kind of thing is part of the game.
There you go.
So.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks for helping get us to 50 episodes of this thing. My gosh, it's still kind of pretty crazy to think about that from where we started to this point, 50 of these things. But here we are. So where do we go from here? I don't know. We'll find out next week.
50 more.
That's right.
To the moon.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for listening. Thanks as always for your support. And until next time, as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatirons.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.